So let's talk a bit more about the way that Warhammer 40k reserves are changing, and in particular really drill into the shenanigans that you can do by arriving your models in your opponent's turn. Hello and welcome back to Warspets Tactics, where today we're talking 40k reserves, and I thought we'd take a bit more of a dedicated video to talk about the Deep Strike and Rapid Ingress previews that we've had so far, seeing as I kind of glossed over it when we had all the exciting new Terminator stats to talk about, though I think it's really quite an interesting subject, and certainly lends itself to some potential shenanigans. Let's talk about what we know so far about Deep Strike and Rapid Ingress, and then some of the potential very powerful uses that it might be able to have on the tabletop. So first up, Games Workshop have given us a fair few hints of some of these universal special rules so far. We don't know 100% what Deep Strike will do, or if it might have changed in some subtle ways, though at least it is pretty helpful to have the mechanic unified for each army, so it's basically going to work the same for most factions. My guess would be that it probably won't change too much. Currently the system I think works really quite well. Set up your units greater than 9 inches away from enemy models. I think the 9-inch range is really quite nice. It means that you have some chance of making a charge, but it's nowhere near guaranteed, even with a reroll. Plus I feel like it's an okay distance for screening as well. Some armies with very good board control might be able to push that bubble back and mean that you can't drop too near them, but quite a lot of the time you might well be choosing whether or not you want to bother Deep Strike screening, or committing those units to the front lines and to objectives. I think it was kind of interesting in that Terminator Teleport Homer preview that it looks like it's going to be a 9-inch exclusion zone horizontally. This will be quite a nice way to fix the issue that they've had in the past, where if you arrive units at the top of tall buildings, you might technically be able to arrive a unit and then move down into engagement range due to the fact that engagement range is now often a bit vertical as well as horizontal. As well as that, in the Rapid Ingress stratagem, they've kind of implied that you will only be able to deploy in certain battle rounds again. I'd guess battle rounds 2 and 3 again, like most 9th edition missions. I'd hope that they might actually bake that into the actual Deep Strike mechanics this time round. I feel like that was something that tended to confuse newer players quite a bit, not knowing why they couldn't turn their reserves up on the first turn, because rather than on the actual reserves rules, it was baked into the mission rules and kind of hard to find. So far, no major changes on the Deep Strike that we know of, but I feel like this one command point stratagem, Rapid Ingress, really does change the game in quite a big way. I touched on a couple of things on the last video, but now the dust has settled a bit, I thought we'd go through it in a bit more detail. So first up, Rapid Ingress does appear to be one of the core stratagems that's going to be in the big 10th edition rulebook. That means that every army should be able to access it. I have a feeling that even if you have an army that doesn't have virtually any Deep Strike whatsoever, we might still be able to put our units into a Strategic Reserve type equivalent like in 9th. That's not guaranteed of course, but seems kind of likely. Quite a nice level playing field there, as it sounds like it wouldn't be locked to any one army or faction. The stratagem costs 1 command point, and they did say there's going to be far fewer command points on offer. We might just be getting something like 1 or 2 per turn or something like that. Currently in Strike Force games, I guess we start with 6, then get essentially 10 throughout the game, so that would be 16. If it's being cut down markedly from that, perhaps something like 1 command point in your turn and your opponent's turn could be reasonable. In any case, the core purpose of the stratagem is allow you to set up a unit in your opponent's turn, sort of like one of these reaction type mechanics that Games Workshop seem to be pushing this time round, so there's a little bit less downtime for the opposing player while their enemy is moving their models all over the place. This one happens at the end of the opponent's movement phase, so I guess if things stay the same that would likely be after any of their reserves have come in. And that would mean that you'd be able to perfectly know where the enemy units are before you put down yours, which is pretty powerful. Then they say that you can pick one of your units in reserves, so that sounds like it might be Deep Strike, perhaps Outflank if that's a thing, and maybe any Strategic Reserve type things, and they get to set up as per the normal reserves rules. My guess is still going to be that 9-inch exclusion zone, though they might tell us different later. Basically the enemy moves their units around, then you turn up one of yours unexpectedly halfway through their turn, and then they go on to shoot and charge. While it is pretty powerful, it is still something that's going to be kind of niche. In most cases you basically wouldn't want to ever use it. Just for say a standard kind of unit, like maybe a Grey Knight Purgation squad, they probably wouldn't want to use it most of the time, as they'd just rather turn up and then get the Alpha Strike on the enemy and unload all their guns into them. If you decided to use Rapid Ingress with these guys, then they might well just turn up in line of sight of the enemy, and then the opponent just is very happy to have another unit to shoot and delete them before they shoot maybe. I feel like Rapid Ingress is going to be more useful for units that are just very, very tough, or maybe either combat units or things that you can hide out of line of sight. I think it's going to be niche, but when it comes up in a big way, it could be really, really powerful. I think the first thing that most people saw when you had this stratagem is that you could use this to set up a really powerful charge out of Deep Strike Reserve. Currently, if you had a melee unit in Deep Strike, like say these Chaos Warp Talons here, they'd have to drop 9 inches away in your own turn and then be gambling on a charge. Even with a command point reroll, we've got a sub 50% chance of making it into the enemy and might just be stuck out in the wind getting shot. Obviously, as with the previous example, you don't really want to just put a unit down right in enemy line of sight. They're still not going to be particularly happy if they just turn up and get shot anyway. But it at least looks like it's possible to use Rapid Ingress to get a super reliable charge out of them just by using a little bit of line of sight blocking terrain somewhere on the table. Say for example, if the Space Marine player moved up, they've got a unit of Hellblasters here on the left, a big Repulsor Executioner here on the right, and there's a line of sight blocking Ruin a little way away from them. You could use Rapid Ingress to turn up your unit of Warp Talons within the line of sight blocking terrain, safe in the knowledge that you can't quite see them with either the Repulsor Executioner or with the Hellblaster squad, so they're going to be alive for this turn, and just pre-measure it so they've got a pretty short charge when they do want to jump into the enemy. Provided your opponent doesn't have the right angles on a piece of terrain like this is just going to be super powerful. There's really nothing that they can do about them. And then when it gets into your turn, you can just move them up with their normal movement, maybe jump over the terrain if they've got fly, and then they should be able to set themselves up for a pretty reliable charge right away. If terrain maps stay pretty dense in terms of the terrain as they are at the moment, it seems like this could be absolutely brutal to deliver melee troops into combat. Almost guaranteeing delivery like this is just very, very powerful. I guess it is a touch terrain dependent. Sometimes it just might not work that well with a slow moving unit that you need to put somewhere kind of close, but certainly with a fast unit like these Warp Talons, they've got a great big 12-inch movement and a 19-inch average charge threat, should be easy enough to find them somewhere to land safe. Otherwise though, I do think there's another couple of really quite interesting uses, and then maybe a bunch of niche ones. Even if you had a unit that wasn't particularly powerful and really quite cheap in reserves, you could potentially make use of Rapid Ingress to gain a few more victory points depending on when objectives are scored in 10th edition. Currently, if it stays the same as 9th, they generally tend to be scored in each player's command phase, and you might get a certain amount of victory points depending on whether you hold one objective, two objectives, or more objectives than the opponent. To be honest, whether they're scored at the end of the turn or the start of the turn, this could still be good. If there's an objective on the map that doesn't have any troops on it, friendly or enemy, then you could just land a squad there, provided that squad is either durable enough to stand up to the guns that the opponent can throw at them, or maybe can hide out of line of sight with some more ruins or terrain or something. This could pretty much guarantee you some more victory points when it comes to your turn. Seems pretty solid perhaps, say if there was an outlying objective that you should have been able to reach but your opponent killed the unit that was going for it, and this is an option that you could choose to either do or not do, depending on whether your opponent could actually threaten or kill the unit that's going for the objective using Rapid Ingress. Another potential use for it could be to try and overload the enemy with the number of threats on one side of the board, maybe not enormously different to how Deep Strike type things work at the moment, but it still could be kind of handy to have in the opponent's turn. Maybe there could be an area of the board where the opponent's got enough units to just overwhelm one of your units, they're likely to hit them hard and then be very few of them left to strike back. Perhaps that could work out very nicely for them, but maybe it could be particularly punishing if you suddenly put down a big durable threatening unit there. And it could lead to some very hard decisions as to what they shoot and target, and having an enormous tough distraction unit jump into the fore might well be enough that they don't shoot as much stuff at your more valuable fragile unit that was just about to get ripped up, and then that area of the board goes your way from then on. I feel like that could be kind of similar for objective purposes as well. Maybe the opponent has moved in such a way that they should be able to wipe out one of the units of yours on an objective. Maybe if you just put down a second line of troops on that same objective with the Rapid Ingress stratagem, they might just not have enough guns or resources to clear it or take it. And again, that could net you victory points for a unit that your opponent might have killed normally, but then can't handle a second tough thing put onto the same place. In general, I'd guess that those ones might well be the primary uses, given what we know so far, though obviously there's lots more to come in 10th edition, so I guess we'll find out if there's more stuff. But there's potentially a fair few other niche things that could be kind of painful for your opponent to have to deal with, or perhaps could be worth using the stratagem in a really wild situation. First up, I feel like you shouldn't underestimate just the threat of being able to do this. I feel like for the most part, because this one's so flexible and you could either use it or not, and you could put your unit virtually anywhere on the board, that your opponent should probably just keep on moving towards objectives and fighting your army and just accept that somewhere that Rapid Ingress unit is going to cause problems. Potentially though, if they do go trying to lock down all lines of sight, and maybe get lines of sight behind certain key ruins and things, they might well be compromising their movement a little bit to do so, and messing with enemy movement just with the threat of a stratagem there is pretty powerful. I feel like that could be a pretty handy external benefit of just having one big threat with the potential to do this, whether or not you even use it at all. Another potentially interesting one could be actually physically blocking line of sight with a big chunky unit. If you could use this with something like strategic reserves, for example, and they work similar to now, you might be able to zoom in something like an AdMech Dune Crawler between a powerful squad and a unit that's going to shoot them. I guess to actually physically block line of sight though, most 40k units would need to be really quite big and chunky. Not that many actually do block line of sight all that well. Probably very niche, but a kind of funny thought. Your opponent just lines up to deal death on one of your elite squads that's kind of fragile, and then all of a sudden a tank turns up and parks in the way. Depending on what happens with 10th edition heavy weapons, it might prevent some sort of heavy weapon penalty if we have that for things like infantry moving and shooting with missile launchers. We don't 100% know that's a thing, but it generally has been throughout the other 40k editions. Generally heavy weapon troops can't move around and fire quite as fast as other units. I guess if you did have a heavy weapon type squad hidden in reserve and your opponent didn't have enough guns to shoot them down with, if you did bring them on through Rapid Ingress, you could potentially set up the squad in their turn, put them somewhere that's out of line of sight of any of their guns, and then have them able to blaze away with full accuracy when it comes to your turn. Again though, that does feel kind of niche, probably not worth it for 1 CP I suspect, and again feels like something where you'd have to be playing the game and thinking about a turn in advance. Perhaps it's a bit too much thought for something that you could achieve pretty simply just by having the unit on the board in the first place. Finally, again, for perhaps very niche uses, might be screening out a charge. Again, if deep strike rules do keep at 9 inches distance, this one will be very niche. I guess perhaps if the opponent was threatening a charge at one of your absolutely crucial units at 10 inches, you could have a chaff Rapid Ingress units just drop down and physically block the charge to that, turning a potentially niche long charge into one that's just entirely impossible. In general though, again I guess that's probably not going to be efficient. You'd probably be shortening your opponent's charge distance by doing that in the first place, plus you'd probably be expending your units and costing 1 command point, never mind the fact that your opponent would have to be pretty lucky to pull off the charge in the first place. I guess if the enemy does have some big things that make their charge threat range absolutely massive though, it could potentially be worth it, but again I feel like that's going to be on the edge case gamey shenanigans that might make sense once in a blue moon, as opposed to being a regular staple. Let me know your thoughts about the stratagem though. I feel like with so many possibilities, I might have missed a few things here. I feel like overall it does seem like quite a fun and curveball type mechanic though, something that could really throw a spanner in the enemy's works. Let me know if you can think any other applications of it, and do you think that this will be practically something that people use quite a lot in 10th edition, or if it's just going to be one of those curios that is really quite interesting at the start, but maybe isn't actually used in practice as much as you might guess. My suspicion is that it does look like a very reliable way to deliver melee units to combat, but if command points are super scarce, it might not be as exciting compared with buying other things in. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying the videos on the channel quite a bit, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that links down in the video description below. Channel patrons do get a few advantages: seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things happen next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.